Erik Erikson was a German-American developmental psychologist and psychoanalyst. He is well known for developing his theory of psychosocial development, which is still widely accepted today. He was born in 1902 to a Danish mother. He was born out of wedlock and never met his biological father. He grew up thinking that his mother's husband was actually his father. So when he learned that this man who he thought was his father wasn't actually his father, he kind of went into, kind of shook his world, and he started to focus his interest on studying identity. After his high school graduation, Erikson attended art school, but later dropped out because pressures from his family did not want him to go to art school. They wanted him to go to medical school. His stepfather was a doctor. So after he dropped out of art school, he did not end up going to medical school. He began to travel around Germany and Italy, and then when he returned home, he decided to become an art teacher. When he was teaching art, he met Anna Freud, who is Sigmund Freud's daughter. He is the father of psychoanalysis. So Anna encouraged him to study psychoanalysis because she saw how how well he interacted with children, and she encouraged him to go and study psychology. So Anna Freud actually took Erikson under her wing, and he became one of her patients and helped him work through his identity crisis, which is a term that he actually coined, identity crisis. Erikson studied at Vienna Psychoanalytic Institute as well as the Montessori school, so he received 2 certificates for Montessori and then a certificate from Vienna Psychoanalytic Institute. He never actually went to college, although he went on to teach at Yale and Harvard when he moved to the U.S. During the time of Hitler's rise with his wife, who was a Canadian dancer and also was a large influence in his psychosocial theory. So him and his 2 children moved with his wife to the U.S. during the rise of Hitler because Hitler was burning all of Freud's books. So he decided that it would be a good time to leave Germany at that point. So while living in the U.S., he began to study Native American children after he taught at Harvard and Yale, and then he wrote multiple books and became very famous for his psychosocial developmental theory. In his book Identity and the Life Cycle, he explains his theory of psychosocial development. There are 8 stages to psychosocial development. In each of the stages, humans go through a crisis, and the outcome of these crises determine a virtue. So in other words, we go through these experiences, we start to question things, and certain people play influential roles in our development at that time. And we're either going to develop a positive trait or outcome or a negative one. Again, with his wife. So the first stage of his theory is trust versus mistrust, which happens during infancy in the first year. Erikson says that if infants have a trusting, attentive caregiver, that they will develop trust, and the outcome will be a virtue of hope. And they'll see the world as a safe place rather than a scary, negative place. The second stage happens during the first and third years, and it is the crisis of autonomy versus shame. Children or toddlers ask themselves, is it okay to be me? So they really need a toddlers are generally destructive, which if you've ever been around a toddler, you will quickly realize that they just like to take apart everything and deconstruct and kind of make sense of the world in this way. So they need an adult who can kind of let them be in control and not be overpowering, and let them explore their environment. And otherwise they will become shameful, and they will not develop the virtue of will. So in old age, this accumulates to acceptance of the life cycle from integration to disintegration. During the 3rd through 6th year of life, children begin to ask themselves, is it okay to do what I do? It's the crisis or conflict of initiative versus guilt. So we can develop feelings of initiative or develop feelings of guilt in children who don't have the opportunity to do things for themselves and develop independence will fall into feelings of guilt. And the outcome of this stage is developing a sense of purpose. Most likely, people who have fallen into feelings of guilt are people who have external reasonings for every mistake or don't take ownership of their problems. There are people who say, it's not my fault that this and this happened, and really just don't take initiative for much. And in old age, this accumulates to humor, empathy, and resilience, which are 3 very good virtues or characteristics to hold. Industry versus inferiority happens during the school age years, which is 6 to 12 years. At this time, children really start to focus on friendships in their school life. They become easily embarrassed or feel fearful that something's going to embarrass them, and that's going to be the end of the world for school age children. It's really just being embarrassed. So if children have supportive adults who recognize their accomplishments in a healthy way, not just saying good job to everything that they do, they develop the virtue of confidence. And later in life, this translates to humility and acceptance of the course of one's life and unfulfilled hopes. So you're taking successes, but you're also accepting your failures, things that haven't happened. Adolescence is 12 to 19 years, as seen on the chart. We go through feeling, questioning of who am I, do I like being myself? We really, just question our identity, and this is when Erickson coined the term identity crisis. So you're not necessarily stuck with these negative aspects of your personality if your experiences aren't positive, and you fall into shame, you have a lot of shame or guilt or mistrust. You can always go back and better yourself and develop the positive virtue. So during this time, during adolescence, that's when we really look back and strive to understand ourselves and why we are the way that we are, and hopefully we develop the virtue of fidelity. which in old age will accumulate to a sense of complexity of life and an overall satisfaction with yourself. During 20 to 25 years, we begin to question what we can love, if we can love, and who we love, and we kind of remove the negative people from our lives. It's the stage of intimacy versus isolation, and we are striving to just create intimate relationships with people, and that's the focus of our life at that point, and we develop the virtue of love. During adulthood, which is 26 to 64 years, we are in the stage of generativity versus stagnation. So during that time, we question what our impact is going to be on the world and what we're going to leave behind for the next generation, because we're starting to realize, that our life isn't going to last forever. You're not so egocentric at that point anymore. Older people usually don't care what other people think of them, unlike, especially in the school age years, that's all that they think about is, what do other people think about me? And they compare themselves. But once you reach adulthood, you don't really care, and hopefully you develop the virtue of caring for others. So during old age, which is 65 through death, we're in the conflict of integrity versus despair. We look back on our lives and ask ourselves, did I live a good life? Am I happy with my choices? Do I feel regret for anything? And hopefully we develop the virtue of wisdom. Well, those are Erikson's 8 stages of psychosocial development. It's still widely accepted today. A lot more research has been done. There is a bunch of new research that supports his theory, and